Hi everyone, it is Friday and we are back for another digital devotion. Normally you don't see me on Fridays for these, um, and I'm getting two in a row here. I'm here pinch hitting for Pastor Mario. He's um, been doing some studies for church stuff, and that is culminating this week. So I am here to take this for him. We're going to continue with going through the Apostles' Creed. On Wednesday, we started that off with the first article, I believe in God the Father Almighty. And today we are going to continue as the Creed continues. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, creator of heaven and earth. So we're going to talk about creation, the doctrine of creation, what that means. And where I want to start, as I was thinking about this whole phrase, creator of heaven and earth, as I was doing some reading and some research around this, I was struck, and there's going to be a recurring theme today, but I was struck by the difference between how we view things today in our modern age and how folks in ancient times would have viewed certain things. Folks who lived in the cultures when the Bible was being written, composed, and when the Creed was being written and composed. And I think, starting with Creator, that's a place where there couldn't be any greater different cultural attitude between us now and the folks who were around when the Creed was first being written. Because in the ancient world, it was a given that the world was created by something, by someone. Every religion had some sort of myth or story about how the world came together. When we look in the Bible, the first two chapters, we get two creation accounts. Genesis 1, in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth. And it goes from there. Genesis 1 has this, it's really almost a liturgical poem about the 7 days of creation. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God separated the light from the darkness. He called the light day and the darkness night. There was evening and there was morning the first day. And we go through this ordered series of events about how God created the world. In Genesis 2, we get God planting a garden. We get God fashioning man out of the dust of the earth and breathing into his nostrils the breath of life. We get the Garden of Eden story. Adam and Eve, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, don't eat the fruit. Adam had one job, and he fails at it. And so there's those stories. That would not have been novel in the ancient world. In fact, it was kind of the job of religion to provide some sort of how did we get here story. And in fact, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, the mind-blowing part of it for folks in the ancient world would have had nothing to do with God being the creator of heaven and earth. In some respects, the point of the story in each case was not to say that God created all that there is. The point of Genesis 1 is not to talk about how God created the heavens and the earth or how God created the human beings. It's to talk about how God created the Sabbath, and the point of Genesis 1 is the institution of the Sabbath. Then on the seventh day, God rests. And we as human beings are called to be like God and have periods of rest from our work. The point of Genesis 2 was not necessarily to say that God created human beings, but it was to provide some sort of understanding about how the world is the way that it is, with human beings, kind of these set apart creatures who have dominion over the earth, who can fashion the earth and change the earth and mold and move the earth in ways that other animals seem unable to. And yet, how is it that we also have this disordered relationship with God, with each other, and with creation. So the point of Genesis 2 and 3 is much more about how did something that God created good go badly than it is how did creation come to be in the first place. Because again, in the ancient world, creation coming to be through an act of the divine was not crazy. It was the accepted kind of way of thinking about the world. Babylonian religion, Egyptian religion, Roman and Greek religion, they all had creation myths. They all had creation stories. It was widely understood that the world came about through some sort of supernatural means. Flash forward to today, and it is very much not accepted truth that the world is created. In fact, for someone in 2020 to read the Bible, what they will find shocking about Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 is very much the fact that it says that the world is created by God and that we aren't here as the result of some sort of pretemporal explosion in the cosmos. The other thing that the way that calling God creator functions within the creed is to create a nuanced relationship between the subject and the object of that opening sentence. I'm getting real deep into the grammar, so please bear with me. The creed starts, I believe, right? So we are the subject of the creed. I believe, you believe, we believe. Human beings are the subject. And then what do we believe in? God the Father Almighty. That's the object of our belief. But in some respects, that puts us at that puts us first in the grammatical hierarchy. We believe. I believe. So I'm the subject, and as the subject, seemingly the most important part. But as soon as we say that God is the creator of heaven and earth, we reestablish that hierarchy. Because it's no longer, if God is the creator, then that means that I am the creature. And so we flip that hierarchy that we had established in the first part of the sentence. I believe in God the Father Almighty. Again, that seems to put me, the subject, over the object, which is God. But in saying that God is the creator of heaven and earth, it flips it. God, therefore, is on the top of the totem pole as creator, and I am underneath as creature. And I think it's important for us to reset that. The modern era really began with, I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum. And ever since then, the Enlightenment project has been to say that we start with the things that we know to be true, that we know to exist. I am a thinking subject. That is the basis, right? Myself thinking. That is the first thing that I know that can truly exist. And we go from there. And when we say the creed in the modern world, that can often be kind of the mindset that we have. I am the thinking subject. What are the things I'm going to agree to? What are the things that I'm going to say I believe? And I have power over that which I believe. And in some respects, I have power over what I'm going to say exists. When we say that God is creator, we are giving up that power. Because if God is the creator of heaven and earth, then it is God who decides what it is that exists. We understand existence, we understand what exists from the standpoint of what God says exists. So it's no longer, what are the things that I can measure? What are the things that I can discern? What are the things that I can sense? And that's going to be the measure by which we determine what is and what isn't. Rather, we say, when we believe in God the Creator, that it is from God that we learn what exists. It is from God that we learn what's real. And that is the segue point, I think, to Creator of heaven and earth. So I want to, as we move to believing that God is the creator of heaven and earth, let's first talk about how this would have functioned historically, how this would have functioned when the creed was written. Because again, it's going to be very different from how the ancients would have read that for how we moderns read that. I mentioned this on Wednesday, but one of the first fights that the Christian church had was the degree to which Jesus was a human being. Because there was this school of thought, Marcionism, if you want to win Jeopardy at some point, that said that the material is bad, that this material world is bad, and that human beings have a spark in the divine within them. They have spirit, and the goal of what was going on in Jesus was for the God of the New Testament, the God of spirit, to defeat the God of the Old Testament, who is the God of material, and for our spirits to escape these bodies in which they've become entrapped. So when in the early church, everybody agreed that heaven was good, that the God of Jesus Christ was the God of heaven. What they disagreed about was whether the earth was good, whether things of the earth was good, whether the things that were created were good. What they disagreed about was whether the God of Jesus Christ could also have been the maker of earth. And so when we profess that God is the creator of heaven and earth, we're saying that there is a continuity, right, between the earth as we know it, the bodies we live in, our materiality. There's a continuity between that and what God is doing in Jesus Christ, the ultimate end goal of things. There's some continuity between the heavenly realms and the earthly realms, things spiritual and things material. There is a body and soul connection. In the modern Christian church, there is still some of that dynamic. Now, some of it we lift out of Paul. Again, when we talk about Marcionism, when we talk about this early fight that the church was having, it's not that the group that won out had scripture and the other group just had some bad philosophy, or were trying to impose a certain philosophy onto the church. Both of them had scripture. And so when you look at the arguments that Marcionites would make, one of them, and when we see it even still in the church today, you can pick it out of Paul when he talks about the dangers of the flesh, and how he wants to live by the Spirit, not by the flesh. And so we'll also hear, in kind of modern church language, this rejection of the physical, this rejection of the material, that all that matters is the spiritual, and we want to compartmentalize the material from the spiritual. Or, I'm good spiritually, so I can do whatever I want materially, as if our actions as Christians only matter in one realm. The creed says that God is the creator of heaven and earth, that God is God's jurisdiction involves both things spiritual and things material. So we can't just cast off this earth because it doesn't matter, right? All that matters is things spiritual and things in heaven, because God created earth as well as heaven and called the earth good. And we can't say that things that we do with our bodies don't matter, or things that we do with our stuff, things we do materially, that they don't matter, because God is the God of earth too. we can't say that all that matters is whether or not our spirits go to heaven, because God rules over, and God's working to redeem the earth just as much as God is working to redeem the spiritual realms. But I do think for broader culture, right, there's been a shift. Because it's not so much that everyone agrees now that the spiritual exists and we're just trying to figure out whether the earth is good or not. Because right now, the vast majority of people would say the only thing that exists is the earth. Or the only thing we can agree about existing, mattering, is the earth. Heaven we're not so sure about. So we talk about science that is looking and working in and doing experiments on and measuring things that are of earth. And that the only knowledge that's worth having is the knowledge about what happens with things here on earth, things in the material. We can only know it if we can measure it. The only reasoning we can use is empirical reasoning. Karl Barth talks about how the heaven and the earth in the Creed refer to realms conceivable to man and inconceivable. I kind of flipped it up. So he will talk about how heaven is the realm inconceivable to man and earth is the realm conceivable to man. And so God creates things that we can see, know, and study, and God creates things that are dependent upon God's revealing them to us. So when we talk about God being creator of heaven and earth, and we say that as moderns, what we're professing is we believe that there are things, that there are parts of reality that are inconceivable to us, apart from God's revelation, apart from having them revealed to us from outside of us. And so it's a claim of the supernatural, right? Everyone would agree that there is a realm that is conceivable to man, conceivable to humanity. It's the world we can see, know, and study. What we're saying when we say the Creed is that there's this other realm, the realm of God, the realm that the Bible sheds light on. But what I think is important about that distinction is it admits that apart from God revealing God's self, apart from God speaking into our hearts and into our lives, we're never going to get there. We're never going to think our way to God. As moderns, we're never going to come up with some sort of science experiment that will get us to God. Because as much as we talk about there being a continuity between heaven and earth, there's also somewhat of a discontinuity in that one is heaven and one is earth. And so when we say the Creed, what we're talking about is that this faith we are professing is not necessarily self-evident. It's not necessarily something that's easy to get to, right? You have had some sort of experience in your life that has made believing not just an option for you, but the best option. But that didn't necessarily come about through the way we learn mathematics. It was some sort of other experience where your eyes were opened to things that had prior to that been somewhat inconceivable. Even as we grow up learning the stories of the faith. I grew up going to Sunday school every week. I grew up doing this thing called Bible Bowl, which was perfect for me because you had to memorize facts, memorize things about the Bible, and because you would then be quizzed. You'd be pitted against another kid who also was trying to learn the same things about the Bible, and you get a question. And if whoever got the question right got to play the game, and the game would allow you to earn points for your team. So before you could play the game, which was like, now I don't think this was it because we were like 6 at the time, but like throw a dart at a balloon. I don't think they gave elementary schoolers darts, but it was also the early 90s, so they might have given us darts. But in order to get to do the fun, cool thing, you had to answer the question right about the Bible. And I still am super competitive. So if you were going to ask me a question and I was going to be pitted against another kid to see who could answer it first and best, I was going to win that. Plus, I wanted to play the game because the games were dope. All right, so I learned a lot of the stories. I learned the who's who. I learned what happened. I learned all those good W questions. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. Right? Because I wanted to get the question right and play the game. But even growing up with that, right, there's still some sort of thing that happened in my life that made me say this story that I'd learned about was the story. And it was my story. And that doesn't come about through just learning facts, through learning about what's talked about in the Bible the same way we learn about what George Washington did in his life. Right? There's some sort of qualitative difference because the stakes, the conclusions, the implications are so much different. When we talk about believing that God created the heavens and the earth, we're saying there's this world we live in, but this world we live in is not completely as it seems. There's other things going on here, there's more going on here. And that is the realm of God. That is the world of God. I also think that it's important when we talk about heaven and earth because it shows us the start point and the end point. Our starting point is earth. It is where we live. It is the life we live now. But the creed also gives a sense of forward progression. That we might one day come under the realm of heaven. Where God fully reigns, where God is all in all. So when we talk about God being the creator of heaven and earth, we're also anticipating the day when the two could become one. When we can live and exist as we are now, but also fully in the presence of God, fully in the love of God. We're coming close to our time, but I want to turn to Hans Urs von Balthasar. His name is so fun to say. I mentioned last time how von Balthasar conceived of the Trinity in terms of love. That instead of having it be this kind of cold thing that we have to memorize, and talking more about how God isn't, what God's being isn't when we talk about the Trinity. So it's not like, rather than saying what God is or why God needs to be this way. How he talks about it in terms of love. That if God is love, love requires a subject, an object, and a bond. And so that the Trinity could be conceived of God being the lover, God is the three persons of the Trinity being lover, responding, beloved, and the fruit of the union of their love. And he's going to continue this when he talks about how God is creator. God didn't need to create the heavens and the earth. God was fully complete in God's self. And so when we say that God is creator, creation is grace. Creation is God wanting to extend God's love to something that is not God. And so in order to do that, God creates. And I love the way von Balthasar casts all this in a Trinitarian light. He says, if such a world, if our world is freely created by God, apart from any compelling need, then this occurs from the viewpoint of the Father in order to glorify the beloved Son, from the viewpoint of the loving Son in order to lay everything as a gift at the Father's feet, and from the viewpoint of the Spirit in order to lend new expression to the reciprocal love between the Father and the Son. Hence, the one triune God is creator of the world. And I love that because it shows how when we say we believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, we are placing ourselves within this beautiful dance of love between the persons of the Trinity. How God creates in order that through creation the Son may be glorified. That the Son receives creation and receives his place within creation, which, as the Creed goes on to say, and as we know as people of faith, is to become incarnate in Jesus Christ, to suffer death, to suffer crucifixion, and to be raised from the dead. I don't know why it took me so long to get to resurrection. To accept all of that in order to present creation, present a redeemed creation, a renewed creation, as a gift to the Father out of love. And how the Spirit's role in creation is to lend this new expression of love between the Father and the Son. The Father creates so that the Son may be glorified, and the Son suffers that he might bring this gift back to his Father. And that the Spirit is actively involved in all of this. In the creating, in the redeeming, in the perfecting. So that the Father and the Son might come to love each other in a new way. It just conceives of the cosmos so beautifully. Luke Timothy Johnson will talk about how the Creed constructs a particular type of world. And so when we say what we believe, when we profess the Creed, we're giving new language, we're giving new thought, new ideas to the type of world that we live in, the type of world we think we live in. Do we live in a world that is bound toward entropy, that is headed towards death? Do we live in a world where things fall apart? Or do we live in a different type of world? Do we live in a world where that isn't oriented towards death, but is oriented towards something else? The way von Balthasar talks about creation, how it is this overflowing of God's love, how creation from the standpoint of the Father is to glorify the Son, creation from the standpoint of the Son is to present a gift to his Father. If creation from the standpoint of the Spirit is to lend new expression to the love between the Father and the Son, that's a place I want to live. That's a place I want to be a part of. That's something I want to, that love, that dance of love is something I want to participate in. And so, when we say the Creed, when we dig into what it means to say we believe that God is the creator of heaven and earth, I find myself constructing a world that is so beautiful, an understanding of the world that's so beautiful, that I can't help but worship and praise and be so thankful that I am somehow caught up in this beautiful dance of triune love. That's where we'll end today. Next week, we are going to move to the next article of the Creed that's going to begin talking about Jesus and the Son's unique place within the Creed and within this story of salvation. So for now, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I hope you are staying safe. I say this a lot, but I mean it. I miss being able to get together for worship, but I invite you to worship with us online on Sunday morning. And until I'm back next week, God bless.